A single glance, a single misunderstanding, and days of silence. Can it destroy a love that once ran deep? This story will make you believe that if love is real, even the deepest cracks can be healed with honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to hold on. Deep and James were deeply in love. But cracks began to show when James grew increasingly close to Trang, his new colleague at work. Their playful banter and closeness made Deep feel uneasy, even though she tried to trust him. Things reached a breaking point when James saw Deep riding past with Tung, a man who once had feelings for her. Overcome with jealousy and pride, James chose silence. He didn't ask, didn't confront, he simply disappeared from her life. Deep waited, days passed. No calls, no messages. Her texts went unanswered. Alone in her apartment, she cried, unable to understand what had gone wrong. The pain of being ignored by the one she loved most slowly consumed her. Then, one quiet afternoon, James returned. He stood at her door, remorse in his eyes. He admitted his mistakes, the fear of losing her, and how he let that fear silence him. Deep didn't scold or argue, she simply stepped forward, embraced him tightly, and kissed him softly, offering both forgiveness and love. They sat down together and spoke honestly for the first time in days. No more walls. Just two hearts finding their way back to each other. And in that moment, they knew, love wasn't about never hurting each other, it was about never giving up, even when it hurts. If you love emotional, heartfelt stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. Lately, Deep had begun to sense something different about James. Although he still smiled at her, still spoke gently whenever they met, there was an invisible distance slowly forming between them. She wasn't the jealous type, nor someone who liked to control her partner, but ever since Trang, a friendly and confident new colleague, joined James's company and started getting close to him, Deep had felt increasingly uneasy. Trang was the kind of woman who exuded confidence and charm. On several occasions when Deep came to pick James up from work, she had caught glimpses of the two chatting alone, their eyes meeting with a familiarity that made her chest tighten. Trang's smile seemed to shine a little brighter when she looked at James. And James was still himself, courteous, kind, always ready to help others. But that very nature of his made Deep even more anxious. She started to wonder if the line between friendship and something more had started to blur. Despite her unease, Deep chose to stay silent. She didn't want to be the one who brought heaviness into their relationship because of her own insecurities. She told herself to trust James, to believe that he wouldn't do anything to hurt her. But that trust began to feel fragile when James started calling less often. Their conversations became brief, distant. He always had reasons, deadlines, meetings, exhaustion, all perfectly valid, yet somehow deeply unsatisfying. Then came that fateful weekend afternoon. James, on his way home from a bookstore, caught sight of something that made his heart clench. From a distance, he saw Tongue, an old acquaintance who used to have feelings for Deep, driving her on his motorbike. Deep sat behind him, her long hair blowing gently in the wind. She wasn't looking at James. She was talking to Tongue, and then they both laughed. There was no physical intimacy, no touch, no signs of anything inappropriate. But to James, the image was enough to shake him. What he didn't know was that Tongue had only run into Deep by chance when she was trying to catch a ride home after meeting a friend. He had offered to give her a lift, and Deep, thinking it was just a short, harmless ride, had accepted. They chatted briefly, about nothing significant. But James didn't know any of this. All he saw was Deep smiling with another man, someone he knew had once cared for her, and jealousy surged within him, uncontrollably. Partly because he loved her deeply, and partly because his pride had been wounded. Instead of asking Deep about what he saw, or even explaining how he felt, James chose silence. He didn't want to appear petty or possessive. But in trying to avoid conflict, he unknowingly let the silence grow into a wall. He started avoiding her calls, replying to messages coldly, and making excuses not to see her. Deep felt the shift instantly. She didn't understand what was happening, only that everything between them had started to feel heavy. She had always believed that if two people loved each other enough, they could overcome any misunderstanding. But now, even the simple question she wanted to ask, "What's wrong, James?" felt impossible to voice. And so, a quiet distance settled between them, not loud, not dramatic, but gradually expanding like a small crack waiting for the moment it would finally split them apart. The familiar room had somehow grown colder in recent days. Deep sat silently on the sofa, her eyes blankly fixed on the phone resting on the table. The screen was empty, no messages, no missed calls. She had tried to reach out to James, sending him casual texts asking about his day, his health, even pretending to be playfully upset like she used to, hoping for one of his teasing replies. But all she received was silence, cold, deep, and hollow. Ever since she noticed James becoming close with Trang, Deep had been carrying a quiet unease in her heart. She had told herself to trust him, to believe that it was nothing, just co-workers, just harmless conversations. But the way James looked at Trang, the way they laughed together as if sharing a world that Deep couldn't enter, it all pierced her self-esteem little by little. She didn't blame Trang. And honestly, she didn't dare blame James either. She feared that if she spoke up, if she confronted him, she might be the one to push him further away. But then came that day, the moment that changed everything. When James saw her being driven past on Tongue's motorbike, the fragile hope she had been clinging to began to shatter. Deep could still remember the look in James's eyes that day. He wasn't angry, didn't yell or demand answers. It was just a quick glance, cold, distant, and unfamiliar. She had wanted to run to him, to explain that it was just a coincidence, that Tongue was an old friend who happened to offer her a ride, and that she hadn't meant anything by it. But James had already turned away, as if he hadn't seen her at all. And from that moment on, he went silent. She waited. The first day, she thought he was just busy. The second, she convinced herself he needed space. But by the third and fourth day, his silence began to eat away at her. Deep called him, her phone rang endlessly, only to be sent to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. She wanted to believe that if he still cared, he would reach out first. But the days kept passing, and all she had was empty waiting. Alone in her apartment, Deep felt like she was slowly disappearing from the world of the man she loved. Her tears didn't fall loudly anymore, they came quietly, steadily, like invisible cracks forming deep in her heart. She began to wonder, can a single misunderstanding really be enough to make someone turn away? Was their love not strong enough to withstand a moment of jealousy? Or had she been fooling herself all along, believing their relationship was stronger than it truly was? Outside, the sky was clear, but inside her, a storm was quietly brewing. Deep no longer sobbed the way she once did. She simply sat there, hugging a pillow, staring blankly into the air in front of her. The memories that used to bring her joy now only deepened the pain. She missed those late-night calls from James, just to say, "I miss you." She missed the surprise hugs from behind, the way they used to argue over what movie to watch on Netflix, only to fall asleep together on the couch. All of it was now just a memory, beautiful, but painfully distant. In that moment, Deep realized the most painful thing wasn't a breakup. It was the silence, the kind that leaves you confused, lost, and unsure of how to move forward. The apartment was still silent, just like every other day. But that afternoon, something felt different in the air. Deep sat quietly on the sofa, her eyes staring out the window where the soft golden light of sunset cast a warm glow on the floor. She wasn't expecting anything anymore, not hoping for anything, just learning to accept. And then suddenly, the doorbell rang. Short, then again, like a heartbeat dragging her back from an old dream. She got up slowly, walking to the door with trembling hands. Her heart beat faster, as if it somehow knew. She unlocked it, carefully. Standing there was James. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with hesitation, regret, and something deeper, something that said he had missed her every single day. His hair was slightly messy, his face damp with sweat, breath a little rushed like he had hurried to get there. But what struck Deep most was that his eyes were no longer distant, they were full of sorrow and love. "I'm sorry," James finally said, his voice hoarse. "I shouldn't have gone silent. I shouldn't have left you alone like that. I let jealousy and pride cloud my judgment, and what hurts most is knowing I pushed you away with my own hands." Deep didn't respond at first. Her tears began to fall, this time not out of pain, but from the overwhelming release of all the emotions she had been holding in. She stepped forward without another word and wrapped her arms tightly around James, clinging to him as if she were afraid that if she let go, he might disappear again. James was surprised, but he quickly returned her embrace, just as tightly. Their breaths intertwined, and their hearts beat as one. "You don't need to explain everything," Deep whispered against his shoulder, her voice trembling. "Just stay. Just be the James, the first love." James gently ran his hand through her hair, his voice deep and soft. "I'm not going anywhere. You are where I belong." Deep looked up at him, her eyes still shimmering. And then, without hesitation, she leaned in and kissed him, softly, lovingly, yet filled with all the longing and love that had built up over the days of silence. James returned the kiss, with all the sincerity in his heart. In that fleeting moment, they melted into each other, no more misunderstandings, no more distance. Just them. Later, they sat side by side on the familiar sofa, the same one that had witnessed so many sweet memories. James told her everything, how he felt when he saw her with tongue, how the fear of losing her took over, and how ashamed he was for choosing silence instead of facing his emotions. Deep listened, and then she shared her own days of waiting, the times she held her phone but didn't dare call, the nights she cried alone, wondering what had gone wrong. There were no more secrets. No more holding back. They spoke from the heart, gently and honestly. James took her hand in his and looked into her eyes with tenderness. "I can't promise everything will always be perfect. But I promise I'll never leave you in silence again. Whether it's anger, confusion, or fear, I'll choose to talk to you, to hold your hand instead of walking away." Deep smiled, a radiant, relieved smile like sunlight after a storm. "We'll learn how to love each other, through ease, and through hardship." Outside the window, the sunset bathed the world in golden light. There were no roses, no gifts. Just two people holding each other, kissing, and making promises never to let go again. Sometimes, happiness really is that simple. This story beautifully captures the fragility and resilience of love. At its core, it's a reminder that even the strongest relationships can falter when trust is shaken, not always by betrayal, but by silence, assumptions, and pride. Deep's quiet pain, her loneliness, and the way she waited for James in vain speak to a universal experience. The ache of being emotionally abandoned by someone you love deeply. What's powerful is how the story doesn't rely on dramatic arguments or betrayals. Instead, it shows how simple misunderstandings and unspoken fears can drive two people apart. But more importantly, it emphasizes how love can heal when there is courage to face each other honestly. James's return, filled with guilt and sincerity, and Deep's response, not with anger, but with a forgiving embrace and a kiss, is a moment of deep emotional truth. It reflects a mature, compassionate kind of love that many long for but few are brave enough to live out. In the end, this story is not just about heartbreak and reunion. It's about choosing love even when it's hard, and about the strength it takes to forgive, to stay, and to begin again.